No, it was not me. Not this time. Representative Spillane, come on down. Good to see you. Senate Judiciary is now in session. The Honorable Representative Spillane is going to tell us all about 207. Thank you, Representative.
Thank you, Chairman Gannon and members of the committee. This will be an extremely familiar bill to you. I want to start out, though, by thanking you for your prescient scheduling abilities that allows me to be here over lunch and not have to miss a vote in the House. I think it was fantastic that you could see that that was going to be a perfect alignment for me.
Luck is the residue of design.
So this bill is the same one that I was asked to amend last term from the chair of Judiciary to keep it these items prohibited for anyone under 18. And so you'll see that it is not a full repeal. It is a repeal of the ban for ownership only if you're over 18, which aligns entirely with our current law on knives of any length, swords, switchblades. And as you're aware, it's perfectly legal in the state to also carry for self-defense firearms, tasers, pepper spray, spring-loaded batons, any number of police batons, nunchucks, any number of other items that are even more damaging or deadly than these items. I believe that this has simply been a situation that's been overlooked because most of these are antiques that people possess and maybe possess illegally without knowing, because the list, although it's an extensive list of people who are not covered by the ban, i.e. if I have a hunting and fishing license, which I do, I can carry brass knuckles. But if another representative doesn't have a hunting and fishing license, he can't. If I happen to be a night watchman, I could carry them. But if I happen to be working in a donut shop, I can't. The exclusions from the ability to carry them is almost as long as the language of the bill itself that bans them. So I would love to see us come in line with our knife laws and say that anyone under 18 may not possess, buy, or sell these weapons, but that they can be possessed, sold, and owned by people older than that age, just like any other of the many items I just listed.
Just for my own edification, what's a blackjack?
Okay, I figured we'd get there again.
Sure.
I've explained this a number of times.
I know you have.
And here's the reason why it's excluded for hunting and fishing licenses, which just seems like a bizarre exclusion.
Yep.
A blackjack was typically carried by fishermen. It is essentially a leather strap filled with lead shot on one end, and they would use it to club fish that came on the boat that was dangerous. They still use it to this day. If they bring in, we don't have swordfish up here, but if you land a swordfish and it's thrashing around on the deck with a big sword, they use a blackjack to put it out so that it doesn't become a danger to everyone on the ship. A slungshot was also used by fishermen and sailors. It was used, it is essentially a weight on the end of a braided rope cord. Currently, you will find those on many keychains, commonly sold throughout the state, even though they're not legal to possess. Smaller, it doesn't say anything in here what size it is, so a small one is still prohibited, but they sell them as a self-defense item on your keychain because it's just a braided paracord with a weight in one end. That was used in a larger form to throw a line to shore when you were trying to bring your boat into shore, or to throw your fishing weights out further when you're throwing your fishing line out. And historically, we would have people come into port in Portsmouth and they would carry these in their pocket as a self-defense when the sailors were coming ashore, and so they decided to ban them. And I don't think we have that problem anymore. I really don't think that these are items that, other than a nostalgic appeal, are going to be carried by most people, save that slungshot that is already sold as a keychain. And in fact, the slungshot would not be confiscated by TSA. I've actually had one on a keychain, walked through TSA, and they did not consider it even deadly enough to stop it from going on a plane. And the blackjack, currently you can buy a version of that that's used as a a book reading aid. It holds the page open when you've got a book open because it's got the leather strap that folds over and holds the leaded weight on the page of the book to keep it open. And as you know, probably brass knuckles are still sold throughout the state as paperweights. The prohibition on carrying them in sales is so nebulous based on the amount of exclusions to the ban and the places that are selling variants on that this is really just a technicality, and I think that we harm nothing in New Hampshire by passing it.
Very good. Questions, Senators? Go ahead, Senator Ocean.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Representative, for taking my call. Taking my question. It's my second committee of the day, and I know you have to get back because you're probably going into session fairly soon.
We have time still.
What?
We still have some time.
You still have time. Okay, good enough. So while there may be an aftermarket or a number of people who collect the blackjack, slug shots, and metallic knuckles for paperweights or antique nostalgia, as you said, are you aware that actually these items can be purchased brand new, updated, not vintage, on Amazon? There's actually a whole shop on Etsy, and that brassknuckles.com will sell you any manner of not paperweights, but weapons.
Absolutely. And in fact, the ones sold as paperweights are actual weapons as well. They're just sold as paperweights. I'm aware of that. I actually had contacted brassknuckles.com to find out if they would make some brass knuckles for me with the state seal on them that I could start giving out to the committee, because it is legal for me to have them since I have a hunting and fishing license. That would be far too prohibitive in expense, but I thought it would be kind of nice to have some with the state seal on them. Again, your question does just show how ineffective the ban is because there's no enforcement of that. It's currently just a secondary offense if somebody is caught with them. And I'm unaware of any data showing that we've got any problems on the street where people are constantly being disarmed from their brass knuckles, blackjacks, or slingshots. I think you're far more likely to find that somebody who's stopped on the street is carrying a knife that's dangerous, pepper spray or a taser, or even their own handgun. And if it was up to me and my daughter was walking to her car late at night, I'd rather she have a slingshot on her keychain to be able to hit somebody and get away than for me to have to try to trust that she can use her firearm without hitting a bystander or having it taken away and injure herself.
Well,
One follow-up. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for taking my question. Currently in 159-17, while you said you can be carrying your brass knuckles, we have to acknowledge that you can't be carrying them unless you are engaged in the hunting or the fishing for which you have a license.
It says a licensed hunter or fisher while in the act of the hunting and fishing.
Right.
One of the acts of hunting and fishing is going to buy the ammo for hunting and fishing. So I could actually carry those to a store while I was going to get my ammo. The same thing would be on the way driving to or from my hunting spot is considered in the act of hunting and fishing. Walking to and from a tree stand or a blind would still be in the act of that. If I was out in the ocean, the act of preparing my boat, walking down the docks, getting everything prepared, I could walk the entire docks on the way to and from my boat because I'm on the way to my hunting or fishing. So it's a fairly broad acceptability of when and where I could be carrying those. And the same is true for any of the other people who are exempted.
Last one.
one more.
Yeah. So I have to disagree with you that perhaps you carrying those while you're in the process of
Senator,
buying.
if we could just.
I'm
get
getting
this.
my
Okay,
point.
question for
Yep.
him. We're not.
That
pontificating.
because when we go further in the statute and we address watchmen, emergency medical technicians, firefighters, or military personnel, you are aware that it says while in the course of their duties, while on duty. There is an action item in there. So
Absolutely.
while engaged in hunting and fishing, not going to work. You're not clear on that?
Unfortunately, as the chairman of Fish and Game, I know quite well that there are a lot of actions that fishermen and hunters take as a daily part of their going hunting and fishing that are considered part of the hunting and fishing activity. It's easy to define the active duties for someone who is punched into a time clock, but when you're a hunter or a fisherman, simply taking a lunch break from my tree stand is still part of my hunting and fishing activity. And it would be unreasonable for any fish and game officer to stop someone and say, you need to completely disarm yourself somehow and secure your brass knuckles, blackjack, or slingshot between your tree stand and the cafe you're having lunch at, or your diner down the street where you're going to get your lunch, and then not make sure no one else can have access to them. They would be on their person.
Thank you, Representative. Senator Ridden, you all set? Great. Thank you for your testimony.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee.
Thank you. Did I get a list? I'm sorry. Thank you very much. That's okay. Are you Cyril? Representative Cyril Auroras? Oh, he didn't want to speak. Okay. Mary Smith? No Mary Smith? Okay. Gonna be quicker here. Jeff Kelman? Come on down, sir. How you doing?
Is it on now? Okay, all right. Yeah, so thank you, Senators Altshuler and Reardon and Gannon, all for your time. My name is Jeff Kelman. I live in Bedford, New Hampshire, and I also am a active member within the Jewish community, and also on the security committee of my temple, the Temple Beth Abraham, down in Nashua. So we're always trying to look at different bills related to things related to minorities and the overall community in terms of how that may impact our view in terms of rising dangers of anti-Semitism and potential violent action or being able to prevent these different things. Specifically, when looking at this bill, I've been able to have conversations with a number of different senators here, and appreciate all of your time for that and those conversations. I found that from an initial perspective, this seems like something that might be unnecessary. There's a variety of different things already that people are using. There's the firearms, people have access to knives and different components, and I think that is something to certainly look at there at first glance. However, when looking into this bill a little bit further, it really does lend itself to think, what would be the real life effect? Would ultimately people, go out and start buying these en masse? And I don't think that would happen. I don't think this is something that would be very popular to a lot of people that they'd be buying. But on the margins, would some people potentially be buying these, and some people that might be using it defensively, others that are using it, in a weaponized sense to attack. But on the margins, if some people are buying these, that means that there's potentially some people there that may be choosing then to not buy guns or firearms or some of these other tools. And so from the kind of perspective of, ultimately what the overall community in New Hampshire is buying and procuring, I think this particular item, sure, it could be used in a lethal sense, but I think more often than not, would be less lethal potentially than a firearm for sure, and even a knife where there's an immediate deadly repercussion to that. So for those reasons, I think when we thread through the nuance and we really think about that, I am inclined to support HB 207 here. If for one other consideration, it's that Currently, it seems to be that it is easy to access, as Senator Altshuler had mentioned there, that there are ways to be able to buy it online. However, it doesn't seem like, first of all, a lot of people are accessing it, but two, when they are simply just buying it there, it's currently a crime. So it's an additional crime for our law enforcement to spend time, energy, and resources, if they were to, even on the margins, enforcing this and going after these individuals as just a potential additional use of their time versus firearms or knives or these other more lethal instruments there. So I think that on the whole, there's probably not a major change here that would come about in one way or the other, but on the net, even a marginal improvement, I think if it can be made on easily enough, then it's worthwhile taking even those steps. So those are my comments there, and I'm open to any questions.
I'll say, you're surprised. I thought you were going to go the other way, saying that these would be, I've seen a lot of sort of anti-Semitic rallies in Pennsylvania a lot. My son lives in Center City downtown. And I thought you were going to go the other way and say that these would be weapons used against.
I think the important detail there is, looking at the state of New Hampshire as it is right now, and also, what is the overall situation of what people can choose? When you're juxtaposing it to those other offerings there, I think if there's something that ultimately could be less fear-inducing or ultimately less violent in that fashion, it's something that it might not be as intuitive. Yeah.
Fine. I thought you were going somewhere else. Okay. Thanks very much for your testimony.
All right. Thank you.
Law enforcement, would they like to weigh in on this? No? Okay. Thank you. Anyone else wish to testify on 207?
Do I turn this back off when I'm done?
All right. Be great. Thank you. Seeing no one else, that'll end the hearing. Give me 1 minute. And I will. You have an extra copy of the bill, Pete? I've been looking at it and I must have left it somewhere. Got amendments. I found one. Never mind. I have too many pages here. We have moved on to 381. We're about to start. Yes. Okay. Representative Belcher, how are you doing today? They keeping you busy upstairs? That's good. Make sure you get it right so we have an easy job.
Will do.
Good afternoon. Whenever you're ready to start 381, I welcome you.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. For the record, Representative Mike Belcher out of Carroll County District 4, Wakefield. We're going to talk about House Bill 381. So the first thing I want to dispel is there's a bit of a confusion around the title. The title suggests that this bill is nullifying the National Firearms Act, the NFA. You will actually not find anything about the National Firearms Act in this bill. It's not mentioned. And the foremost point of this bill is not even really around nullification. Actually, the foremost point of this bill is a legal battle that I would like to see us get into the courts and potentially all the way up to the level of the Supreme Court. Because I would like to take aim at one of the worst decisions, I believe, in the history of the United States Supreme Court, Willard versus Figburn, which was a very unfortunate decision that has been on the books for quite a while. And what this extremely broad and overreaching decision by the Supreme Court did many years ago was, well, it enabled the rise of the bureaucratic administrative state, for one, which is effectively a fourth branch of the government not found in the Constitution. And it also gutted the last vestiges of federalism, that those powers that were supposed to remain with the states began transiting up to the federal level, really making states a subservient entity to the federal government, as opposed to a dual sovereign, which was how our nation was established. Now, what they did in this decision was they did a little 6 degrees of Kevin Bacon with the Commerce Clause. They decided that a gentleman who was growing grain on his own property to feed his own livestock could actually be prohibited from that act by the federal government under the Commerce Clause, which is something that was never envisioned by the Founding Fathers. Now, what they said is that because this gentleman is growing a certain amount of grain on his farm that's been then being fed to his animals, that same amount of grain would not then need to be purchased on the marketplace. And because that grain would now not be purchased on the marketplace, and because that marketplace is in fact interstate in nature, then it has some imperceptible small impact on the overall prices of grain in the country, and therefore may be regulated under the Commerce Clause by the federal government. Now, we know that the founders definitely did not intend for this to happen because the Commerce Clause makes specific reference to the concept of interstate commerce, not intrastate commerce. It would have been very easy for founders to use the phrase intrastate commerce or simply say regulate trade within a state, not between the states. So this was, I believe, a severely erroneous decision that was made. Now, I crafted this bill from the ground up in order to establish the predicate for this legal challenge. I decided that firearms was the best vehicle to use for that challenge because while we could certainly make the case to the federal government that grain or any other private property is protected under the 4th and 10th Amendments, the only article of private property that is mentioned by name in the Constitution as being a right of the people is arms. Therefore, it has the most direct and broad basis for making this argument in the courts. Further, I wanted to signal to the courts very, very carefully and clearly that we were serious as a state about regulating this within the state, which is why the bill added the criminal penalties for the potential removal of these items from the state, exporting them to other states. Lastly, I will say this legislation is purely enabling. It doesn't require anything of anyone, and it would have no impact on any firearms manufacturer in the state who was disinclined from doing so. And with that, I am happy to take questions.
Thank you. So under the Wicker decisions, which I've read a lot in the last day or two, because I knew you were coming, and do you not take, if some type of weapon that they don't allow under federal law, you don't see it entering the stream of commerce? You understand their argument that it'll have a ripple effect, the tiny thing, just like the grain. So I understand that you understand that part. Mm-hmm. What do you say to that the item is going to potentially then enter interstate commerce?
That's an excellent question. What I would say is that this bill is crafted as carefully and specifically as possible to make the most reasonable case to the Supreme Court possible that this item will not enter into interstate commerce. Now, if they were to uphold the original decision, saying, again, playing 6 degrees of Kevin Bacon by somebody producing this in New Hampshire, that it somehow impacts imperceptibly the broader marketplace, they would strike this down. But I believe for the first time in perhaps many generations, the current court might see things a little bit differently, and they might have a willingness to, if not even overturn, perhaps at least narrow their determination of the Commerce Clause.
And so what about just a supremacy clause argument that they've ruled on it, they've made a decision on type of weapon, what's legal, what isn't? And aren't you now going against the supremacy of the federal government versus our state?
Thank you. And that's an excellent question, but the supremacy clause is only going to come up as a secondary if they have the right to regulate it in the first place. And it's only that Commerce Clause decision that comes in and gives them that right. So the supremacy clause only applies to those powers that are specifically delegated to the federal government. And my argument here is that this is actually something delegated to the states and a 10th Amendment power.
Very good. Other questions? Senator Abbas here next, Joe.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for taking my question. So I understand, as my colleague to my left mentioned, perhaps certain devices being against federal law. But I read this to say, really, could be any rifle or pistol that has that marking on it, not for export outside New Hampshire. I guess in that case, is if the firearm is manufactured here and legal in the majority of the states, why is it limited to just being in New Hampshire? And my point to that is, wouldn't that somehow potentially create a commerce clause issue as well?
Thank you for that question. And what I would say to that is that the only angle being attempted in this is to limit the interstate commerce of that item, which is why it's purely enabling. There's nothing that would require, for instance, a manufacturer to put that stamp and make this a New Hampshire only item. They can certainly just do as they do now and not put that stamp on there, and it remains eligible for interstate commerce, but they can choose, if they so desire, to place that stamp on there and make it a New Hampshire only item that has to stay here under law, because that is a power that we have as a state to regulate not inter, but intrastate commerce. Just as, for instance, the state next door to us, to our west, limits the importation of certain firearms and accessories. If they have the right to limit imports, then certainly we ought to have the right to limit exports as well.
But if I can ask a follow-up.
Yep.
But let's say someone were to buy something that's limited for only the state of New Hampshire, even though it's legal in other states, and then they want to move to another state, like somewhere in Texas, Florida. They can't bring it with them. And I guess my point is, what's the interest in forbidding that behavior? Because it seems to me that you have someone that now owns a firearm or manufactures some device that they now no longer can possess with them, even though they can buy that same product, same pistol, same device in the state they're moving to, but it doesn't have that stamp on it.
Thank you. And to expound a little bit, yes, there is a restriction there. And yes, I believe that's okay and it's fine and it's warranted, because if states have the authority to regulate the importation, because you mentioned perhaps this item is legal in another state, but in other states it might not be legal. And if they're going to prohibit that item being legal or being imported in the state, under that same theory of law, we ought to be able to limit the export. And it's only by limiting the export that we can reasonably make the argument and defend it before the courts that this is a regulation that is left to the state as intrastate commerce and not, in fact, interstate commerce.
Sure.
And I understand the goal here, but perhaps the unintended consequence is you now have a firearm restriction limiting where you can bring it, even though the state that you may be traveling to, that firearm is legal to have in that state as well. And to me, I look at that as a restriction on firearms. No, I don't necessarily look at that as a pro-Second Amendment position to take. I think you're restricting where I can go with it and where I can bring it, especially when the whatever state I'm going to, I'm not providing their law. Isn't that a restriction on firearms?
Thank you for your question. I would say in the grand scheme of things, it could be viewed in that manner, but in reality, it's not, because there is not currently any protection under that. If we were to take a federalist constitutionalist view of the law, where each state, as it's been said, is sort of its own lab of democracy, it has a fairly wide berth of ability to regulate within its own borders, then we too can regulate within the state of New Hampshire the export, just as another state would regulate exports or imports. And yes, it would require, if you were to move out of state, for instance, either to sell that item to somebody within the state or to destroy that item, render it inoperable.
Last one.
So you agree that this amounts to a restriction on firearms?
Thank you for your question. I would not agree that in reality, because there is no currently enabling, it's a hypothetical, it's a future hypothetical. And the reality on the ground is that this expands firearms rights, not narrows them. If we were in a situation, for instance, where the reality on the ground was you could manufacture anything in the state you want and then take it out of state to any other state where it might be legal, then I would say yes, it actually does impact a restriction, but that's not the reality on the ground as it stands. The reality is this would give people the authority, should it be upheld, to manufacture within the state items such as a suppressor, for instance, which is a very important item for hearing protection, without having to go through a lot of federal legal hoops that are arguably unconstitutional under the NFA.
Thank you.
Senator Oshling.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Representative Belcher, for taking my question. So often when we are looking at legislation and listening to the testimony that you just gave, we're looking to solve a problem. What's the problem? This bill solves it. And from, if I understood, and please correct me if I did not understand this, you gave us a little tutorial on Wickard v. Filburn, and you filed this, did you file this bill knowing it's in conflict with existing law because you want to provide a vehicle for a potential legal fight that will hopefully make it through the appellate process to the Supreme Court?
I would agree, except for one modification. I do not think this is in conflict with any existing law. I think is it in conflict with a existing Supreme Court decision. So yes.
May I follow up, Mr.
Yes.
Chair? Thank you. So thank you for the correction. You believe that this would set up a vehicle for this to go through the process at New Hampshire taxpayer expense, because the state will have to defend its position in order to go through the appellate process to hopefully get to the Supreme Court.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you. Seeing no other questions, thank you for your testimony. Aaron, is it? I'll let you say it. How do you say it? Okay, Kasich. Good afternoon, sir. How you doing?
Good, sir. Thank you, Chairman and committee. Most of what I was going to say has already been said, but I wanted to point out a couple of things that would support this bill, which I do. And that is that a similar bill was recently passed in Texas with respect to suppressors, so that you can actually fabricate a suppressor in Texas. It has to stay in the state, just like this bill is suggesting, and you can do that without NFA involvement, right? And so if you look at what the representative just discussed here, and you think about really the three things that would be included in this bill, it would be the suppressors, it would be short-barreled rifles and short-barreled shotguns. Already with the NFA procedures, if you build an SBR or an SBS, you have to engrave it with a serial number and your name, right? And there's plenty of places you can do that. So doing what's called for in this bill would be easy. There's many places around that do laser engraving on firearms for a variety of reasons, and that's one of them. So I just speak in support of this bill. I didn't introduce myself, so I live in Hollis. I'm here as a board member for the New Hampshire Firearms Coalition, and I work I'm retired. I work part-time at Merrimack Firearms, so I deal with the NFA items quite a bit. So with that, I'll take any questions.
Thank you very much. Senator Abbas.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for taking my question.
Thank you, sir.
I understand the example you used of suppressors, and I suppose, limiting this to just suppressors is different. This applies to any rifle, any pistol, any revolver, provided it has that marking on there. And I'm looking at it by having that broad application as a restriction on firearms, in the sense that if you're traveling to another state where whatever firearm or whatever accessory you have is legal in the state you're going to, I'm looking at this as a restriction on firearms, as opposed to being, as some say, pro-Second Amendment bill. I'm just wondering if you agree with me that this does amount to restriction on firearms and really accessories for that matter.
We already have restrictions from state to state based on state law. For example, the shop I work at is in Merrimack, so we're right near the Massachusetts border. And I get people in the store all the time that want to buy a handgun from us. And I don't have much I can sell them, to be perfectly honest with you, because of the draconian restrictions that exist in Massachusetts. And so we already have those restrictions in place. What this bill does, as I see it, is that if you're not going to have any interstate commerce with the firearms or accessories that you build, it prevents the NFA from the draconian process. And I can tell you, they've speeded up quite a bit in terms of approval for tax stamps for suppressors, as an example. It used to take over a year to get a tax stamp approved. And you have to pay a $200 tax, basically, on each NFA item. Right, so now we're seeing the fastest turnaround that I have had was 17 hours for a tax stamp, right? And so that, what I see this bill doing is it allows you to build firearms and accessories and that are not meant for interstate commerce, that are legal and don't have to go through the NFA process, which I believe should be eliminated nationwide, to be honest with you.
So my follow-up is, but
Yes, sir.
the example of Massachusetts, I understand you're violating Massachusetts law, but if I bought a suppressor in New Hampshire that has this marking on it and then wanted to go to Texas, where that suppressor is also legal, would I restrict my ability or my rights to bring that suppressor to Texas?
Well, you would have to either destroy it or sell it in New Hampshire if this law were enacted the way it's written.
One last follow-up. What I'm asking though is, but why would I want to restrict my rights as a lawful gun owner and someone who lawfully owns a suppressor to not be able to bring that suppressor into the state of Texas, especially if I'm not violating Texas law?
Yes, I'm viewing this as eliminating the requirements for NFA items in New Hampshire. So I understand what you say and agree with that, right? But I would rather be able to build a short barrel rifle in New Hampshire and use it here without having to go through the NFA process. And that's what I see this law enabling.
Understood. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Any other questions? Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, sir, for
Yes, sir.
being here, and I apologize for being tardy. So if it's already been said, just indulge me. So if I understand this correctly, right now, if I want to purchase, I'll just stay with a silencer. Under current state law, then I would have to get the NFA stamp on that and go through the process. If this law were to pass, I could manufacture, put my serial number on it, follow whatever that is, but I avoid having to go through that expense in time. So I forego the NFA Act as long as I stay in the state of New Hampshire. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And to me,
So you wouldn't be putting a serial number on it. You would be putting for use in New Hampshire only, like it says in the bill. So you don't have to serialize it.
so,
Right now, under the NFA rules, if you build something, you do have to serialize
okay.
it.
Thank you for that. Could I just follow up? So I would say as a New Hampshire gun owner, that would be a benefit to me. And that I know where I am and when I leave my state. And I would be fine with that, if you could believe that, sir. Thank you.
Correct, and I would add, it depends what ends up happening with the ATF and the NFA regulations, right? Because you can do a transfer of an NFA item from one individual to another. It's a complicated process, and you would end up having to pay a tax stamp as it now stands.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much. I don't think I see any other questions. You're all set. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Milo Moradi.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. My name is Milo Myrite. I'm from Pittsfield, New Hampshire. We're just representing myself. A lot of what I had to say has already been said. Here specifically, though, to talk about suppressors. As Representative Belcher mentioned, they are essential hearing protection devices, even in duplicate with earplugs and earmuffs. A few years ago, when I started to get into firearms, I just went to my friendly local neighborhood indoor gun range, rented a handgun a few weekends in a row, and I had put less than 1,000 rounds downrange when my ears started to ring, and they continue to do so. They will continue to do so as long as I live. The status quo where at that range, practically nobody was using a suppressor. I wasn't using one. It's 180 degrees backwards from where it ought to be. Every car's got a muffler on it. Almost every firearm ought to have a suppressor on it. It's the same technology. And so this bill I see would be the path to a good step forward for that. It wouldn't directly impact me, of course. The damage is already done. What we do have control over is how many other people in New Hampshire are going to have this kind of hearing damage before we solve this problem here. One last thing I'd like to add, though, on the discussion with the previous two speakers. Arbitrary pistols, revolvers, rifles, it's entirely up to the manufacturer whether or not to market for New Hampshire use only. If there is any relevant federal law regulating interstate commerce that where they wish to rule out the possibility of interstate commerce, then they could see benefit from marking it for New Hampshire use only, or to not do so and sell it as usual under the current process. Contrary-wise, most pistols and revolvers, you would simply not mark them as such, and they would continue to be treated under the present laws and rules that they are. And that's all I have. Happy to take any questions.
Seeing no questions, thank you very much for your testimony.
Thank you.
Does anyone else wish to testify on 381? Seeing none. You're the boss. No real reason. Um.
At this time, we will now open the public hearing on, so we're doing the amendment.
Yes, the amendment to.
Hearing on proposed amendment 2025-1481S to HB 381-FN. Senator Gannon, the floors are yours.
Thank you very much, Senator Abbas. I'm Senator Bill Gannon. I represent the wine district of New Hampshire, going from Sandown to Seabrook up to Epping would be my most northern one. And so we welcome you anytime to come to do a wine tasting in our area. This is Representative Bobby Cox of South Carolina, representing Sig Sauer. They're one of the largest employers in my district. It has come to my attention that in pending future litigations that they face, there's been a new concept to try to go after some of our gun manufacturers. He'll explain it probably more depth than I am, but the tort theory is not that there's any real defect with the gun, but the fact that it's missing things. It doesn't have a magazine disconnect. It doesn't have a chamber indicator. Doesn't have fingerprint recognition technology. Things that you could order on your gun, but again, most police wouldn't want some of these features because they want to get a shot off if there's a chamber. If the clip comes out and there's a bullet in the chamber, they want a bullet in the chamber, so in a tussle, they could use that last bullet to defend themselves. So for this and other reasons, I have brought this amendment to protect our gun manufacturers who, again, are making a product that has no design flaw. It has no problems with it inherently in itself. It's just the absence of things that, say, in Massachusetts might be considered wanting. Possibly in New Hampshire, these additional things that they look as necessary would be an impediment to police work and to the purpose of most of these guns. Most of these features can be ordered if that's how the ultimate receiver of the gun wants it. But again, they would be problematic to many of the people who are receiving these guns. Bobby Cox probably will go further into detail than I have. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Members of the committee, that was a great introduction. I can elaborate a little bit more just from a Sig Sauer perspective, but thank you for hearing this amendment. As was mentioned, I'm Bobby Cox. I also serve as a State House representative, but I'm also the Vice President of Government Affairs at Sig Sauer. I've been with the company for about 8 years after I left active duty service, and it's just been an incredible time and opportunity there. SIG's main effort, as you know, is supporting our service members and law enforcement with their crucial mission. Our drive and commitment to the highest quality in our products is really part of our DNA that we live and breathe every single day. We know this all too well because of the 2,500 employees here in New Hampshire. About a third of them are former law enforcement and veterans. So we really have that in the forefront of our mind when we're making these products. In addition to that, we have 400 engineers that are on staff at SIG. And so we pride ourselves on the quality and the expertise and design and manufacturing that we get from those 400 engineers every single day. This passion and dedication to quality has resulted in major contract wins, which has been great for New Hampshire. We're the handgun of choice of every single service in the United States military, several federal law enforcement agencies, as well as big state agencies such as Massachusetts and Rhode Island, which are nearby here as well. In light of this, as like the chairman mentioned, we wanted to bring to the committee's attention a national phenomenon that's been occurring and is becoming detrimental to this crucial mission of bringing the best products and technology to our law enforcement and military. Here in New Hampshire, we've actually seen a rash of lawsuits that was touched upon that are brought by plaintiff tort attorneys and representing both private citizens and law enforcement officers from states claiming that our flagship pistol, the P320 that's made here in New Hampshire, is defective because it does not have an optional external safety. There are a handful of plaintiffs' lawyers that recruit individuals throughout the country that bring the court cases here saying that they had a negligent discharge and actually encourage them to sue us, Sig Sauer, and are attempting to create a judicial mandate through repeated litigation that pistols without this external safety makes the gun defective. The proposed amendment that the chairman mentioned really touches upon the product liability actions and includes these optional features inside the amendment so that a consumer may choose to select or reject for their firearm depending on their user preference, depending on what they're doing with the firearm. So this amendment is essential to codifying what this pistol does. The features are optional, and just because they don't have those optional features does not make the gun and the pistol defective. Now, without these proposed changes to the law, the plaintiffs' lawyers will continue to come here in New Hampshire. They'll continue to use and see New Hampshire as a place where they can litigate these cases and claim that these safeties without pistols are defective. There's been 77 cases that have been brought here, and none of them are in-state residents. They're just from all across the country. So we want to bring this amendment to you to show what out-of-state plaintiffs' attorneys are doing to attacking in-state businesses, and we ask for your support and help as we discuss this. Thank you.
Go ahead, Senator
If I may inquire with a question. So I certainly appreciate the goal of this, but on line 10 of the amendment, it says any pending or future product liability actions. So I suppose if there's a pending lawsuit that exists today, is constitutionally speaking, are we permitted to actually retroactively apply that to, I suppose, an injury that has already occurred? I understand maybe future injuries that, have not occurred yet, their cause of action they haven't sustained the injury that they're suing for.
Right.
I think we can do that, but I'm concerned about pending, and I suppose future product liability means perhaps the injury has occurred, but the lawsuit hasn't been filed yet. So most of the time I've seen when we make a new law, it doesn't retroactively eliminate a cause of action they would have had in the past. it would apply to a new injury. So I guess any constitutional explanation for that, or we,
It'd be hard to interpret and kind of go out on a limb of how they were interpreting that. That was, our intent was just to stop them from bringing the pending cases and future cases here to New Hampshire and try them in their own states or somewhere else because they're out of state. So that was the intent to address this with this amendment.
so I just, last of all I'm saying is, I think I support the premise of what this amendment does.
I understand what you're asking.
But I suppose if I'm a plaintiff in a lawsuit today, and this passes, that I'm wondering if does that even hold up in a court?
I agree with you. I believe it would only be future non-filed cases legally.
So if I understand correctly,
So we could word it differently.
the intent is for someone, if this becomes law today, and its effective date is upon passage, and
Yes,
someone get injured tomorrow, it would apply to them, but
none of I would think the existing cases would only apply. We can ask our attorney, but I believe you're correct.
thank you. So we're in?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for taking my question. Why is New Hampshire the chosen forum for those cases? Is there something different about our law? Do other places already have this provision?
And that's why we've been asking our question ourselves. We dug into the laws here, and it seems that the way it's set up here compared to the other states that they could take it to, it's just very favorable to bring these court cases here. And so that's why we wanted to address that issue, because we're fighting all these court cases out of town, and every single court case we have to fight takes away money from granted state residents and workers that we can employ and technology. So if they're going to do it, let's not have it do it to the in-state company here. Let's do it where it's actually occurring.
Oh, do you mind me asking, are they brought in federal court or state courts here?
I'm not too sure. I'm not too sure. I'd have to check up on that.
Okay. So if we were to address that these kinds of suits would have to be brought where the plaintiff resides, not where the defendant is, would that solve the problem?
I believe we're good, not to get too much into interpretation because I don't have a strong legal background like the committee does here, but that would be the intent. Like, if you're going to bring a case in New Hampshire, you have to live in New Hampshire.
Oh,
I would think we're doing business here. They could bring the headquarters here.
that's.
I understand why they're bringing it here because the headquarters, I probably would do the same thing.
I agree, and if it's a favorable forum, it would,
Yeah.
but if it's federal court, it's
Then
not
it's
going
federal,
to
it's a
matter.
whole different thing. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's sidebar.
I believe it's state, so that's why we're doing that. So as opposed to federal, but we can get back to the committee on that. So.
Okay, I appreciate that. One more, Mr. Chair. Thank you. And you said repeatedly, we appreciate Sig Sauer as an employer, a great New Hampshire employer, certainly employs a lot of people. You said in your testimony that it was providing firearms for law enforcement and the military. Is this bill, are we only talking about guns that are sold to law enforcement agencies or
Yeah,
military?
this would be any commercial, federal, state agencies, local law enforcement. We're seeing both law enforcement officials as well as private citizens bringing these lawsuits against us. And the P320 is the main focus. It's a very safe firearm.
Yes.
We've produced 3.6 million firearms that are out there since 2017. And so this is a very small, it's like a 0.0% of the cases that are brought up. So a lot of times we find out it's never the firearm. It's personal training, the equipment they have in it with the holster, something that was caught in the trigger well that actually set it off. And so it's not an unsafe gun. It's one of the numbers.
That's why you're in court to
Exactly,
actually
yeah.
answer that question, right? So one last question, Mr. Chair.
So recognize.
So if we were to allow these, without these optional safety things, sold to law enforcement and military, but requiring if it's an individual citizen that they can't order a gun without the safety mechanisms, would that control some of the lawsuits that you're seeing?
I don't think it would. I think because depending on the law enforcement division, sometimes they'll buy their personal guns and then use it for their service pistol, that kind of thing, with different agencies. So I think you have to take the whole holistic approach because it's hard and it's a barrier to us for production because we have to produce something with a loaded chamber indicator is a lot more cost intensive, materials intensive, that kind of thing. So we want to keep it carte blanche on that regard because there's so much effort into it. And it's really a state law because some states like Massachusetts, you can have a certain number of magazines on. So that would be something that you guys would have to pass on a state level to mandate what the civilian personnel person could have as a feature. So.
One more, Mr. Chair.
So recognized.
So in the realm of the cost of lawsuits, which I think is, what generates you to come here and ask us to change the law, certainly trained people, military, law enforcement, people who are trained to use that firearm is a different category of folks than civilians who can just walk into wherever and buy a firearm. So maybe is more in need of those kinds of feet. They shouldn't necessarily be able to buy a gun, or it's going to be more accident prone for them to have a gun without those safety features.
Well, it always goes back to the individual.
Right.
Most of these cases are law enforcement who have more training than the civilian sector that we're seeing for these cases. But it always goes back, if you're going to buy a firearm, just like in New Hampshire, you want the options. We're not going to mandate how they tell you to do this. What's safe enough? We put one safety on it, and then the plaintiff's attorneys will be like, you need two safeties. Oh, you need DNA recognition. So where do you stop? So all those safety features are an option right now. They're not mandatory. But a lot of the cases, majority of the cases that we're seeing are from law enforcement because it's an individual driven. They don't have they need to train more with that new firearm. They need to make sure they have the right equipment. And we always stress that even with the civilian market. If you're going to buy a firearm, be safe with it, train on it, and be proficient with it. Because in my mind, the first safety is that individual, with how well they know that firearm. So
Thank you.
thank you,
Appreciate it.
Senator. Yeah.
Senator Altshuler.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And thank you, Representative Cox, for taking my question. I think, did I hear you correctly when you were saying that one of the reasons that you are here on behalf of Sig Sauer is that you're bringing this legislation is that these lawsuits, and I think if I heard you correctly, are taking away resources that you could be spending on employees in the state,
Yes, ma'am.
that you don't have enough money to cover your legal bills?
No, well, it's just I wouldn't say
did I
that.
miss?
It's more of a,
So can I go? So when
What
I
did I miss
expressed,
there?
sure. So
Well,
if
he
you
said
bring-
it, not you.
Okay, you answer the question.
okay. Well, it's a sum of, gains where are we going to spend more money on R&D to make safer guns? Or are we going to spend more money to compete for better systems when it comes to military product? Or do we have to compete? It's like there's a finite amount of resources for any private company, and we could be hiring more engineers, more prior military law enforcement to work here to build better products for our law enforcement, or we have to fight these court cases that are coming here. So it's just, what every private business deals with. It's like, where do you put the resources, So, and that's why we're trying to free that up to help out more in the state here as opposed to fighting lawsuits from across the country where they could take it somewhere else, So.
May I follow up?
So recognized.
Thank you. So I'm looking at some data here, and it looks like Sig Sauer made $31 million in 2021. So it's, I'm struggling to see how you are not able to meet your needs for these lawsuits, including wrongful death. You mentioned that that Sig Sauer has contracts with the military and with hundreds of municipal law enforcement agencies across the country. When Sig Sauer got the military contract for the P320, did they not have to retool it because there were design defects? Did we not hear about that in some of the court cases that are pending right now?
Well, every time you have a military contract, you go through a series of competitive bids, engineering change proposals where they're saying, hey, the reliability and function may have to change, but that's happening in all government contracts. And we do that before it actually gets into the hands of the soldiers and law enforcement. You go through a acquisition test to make sure it's safe, and then it's actually ready for prime time and be issued. And so there's a very dedicated legal process in the acquisition world where you go through that. You make sure it's safe, you're experimenting, but all the companies do that. It's not just 6 hour. And then once you get to the point, this gun is ready to be issued to the service members. And we have 500,000 of those pistols in the United States military right now, and the feedback has been incredible. The reliability, these firearms will shoot 5,000 rounds without any malfunction. And so it's just and that's the point you get to with all the testing, experimenting, changing, and that's just a regular process through the acquisition within the United States military.
May I follow up?
May I follow on?
Thank you. So there's a number of outstanding cases regarding the P320, including a wrongful death. And it appears, and correct me if I'm wrong, are you trying to limit cases coming here to New Hampshire? We know that there have been cases settled in Georgia and Pennsylvania, and it appears like you want to shut off an avenue for people to come to New Hampshire to get justice. Is that not what's happening here, or what am I missing?
No, it's a valid question if you're outside looking in. You know, we're living this day to day where, you know, we're making thousands of guns down the road in Newington. Like I said, there's 3.6 million out there. If this gun was defective and an issue, we would know it. But I mean, there is a small percentage. And the thing is, if I knew working for SIG and the people that work there, the military and the law enforcement alumni that work there, if we knew this gun, there was an issue, we wouldn't work there. Because we take pride in the products that we have that we're pushing out to them. And so if there's majority, actually all of the cases that we've seen with these guns, the gun has never been defective. It's been user error. It's been equipment associated with the gun. It's been something that's caught. The gun is performed like it's supposed to. You pull the trigger, it goes off. And that's where the safety aspect and the training comes in for the individual. But ma'am, and I don't want to sound cold about this. I mean, I've lost soldiers in combat because of lack of training and awareness of their equipment. And we live and breathe that every day. And we make sure, so we train, we offer free training to law enforcement, free training to consumers when they buy a firearm to make sure that they are actually safe and know how to be proficient in that use of that pistol. So we take it seriously. And we're not trying to say, oh, it's not our fault. But once you start digging into it, there's more issues than just the pistol. It's never been the pistol. It's just been the use of it, the respect of it, the storage of it, to make sure you have proper use of it. So.
Okay. And may I have a last follow-up, Senator?
Last follow-up.
Yeah. So I think I just heard you say that it's a training issue and that you don't have any defective guns. But isn't it true that the P320 6 Hour offered to do a safety check on it and to take them back from people? You've sent boxes and said if you would like us to retool your P320, send it back.
Yeah.
We will pay for that. We will fix it. So doesn't that indicate that there's something wrong with it, that you'll offer to take it back?
No, I'm glad you brought that up. So that was a upgrade. It was not a recall. And the reason why, because there's this industry-wide standard that's called SAMI for all of the pistols out there. And the P320 performed to all the standards of what the industry has for pistols. But there was a mechanism where we could even make it safer. And so instead of there was not a recall, it was a voluntary upgrade to say, hey, if you want this newer trigger, then we're going to offer that to you. And it wasn't a recall, it was an upgrade. And so that's why it was still a safe gun. I haven't done it to any of them because they've never gone off, because it's just the awareness of the trigger actual acquisition. So it was not a recall, it was an upgrade.
Senator Abbas, can I finish an answer to Senator Reardon's question earlier?
Yes, well, I just want to ask because we're on that topic. So if I can understand, if this as it's written would not prohibit any form of product liability cases, my understanding is really limited to claims that it's a defective design or a defective product, and it's if the theory of that, what that defect is, or a design defect, or whether it is on lines 14 to 17, or 14 to 18, excuse me. It's limited to claiming that is the nature of what is the design defect or product defect. I don't know the exact details of I didn't say it wasn't a recall, but to the extent that even if you said it was, which is not, that is not what any of these for. So that, I think that claim or cause of action could still technically be brought here.
Yeah, I agree.
Limiting these as claiming this is defective.
Exactly, yeah. And that goes back to, like, for some reason, there is a defective pistol, for some reason. You can still bring that here to New Hampshire if that's the case. But we're saying they're bringing it based upon the optional features that were given to them. If they don't have one of those optional features, they're claiming it's defective. But it still functions the way it's supposed to. And all the law enforcement agencies, if you want that feature, you can get it. If you're a personal consumer of the pistol, you can get that. But just because it doesn't have one of those optional features does not make it defective. That's what we're trying to prevent here. Thank you.
Thank you. Senator Gaines.
I think it was either you or Senator Reardon. The current cases are in federal court, in New Hampshire federal court, but the federal court may apply state law when dealing with the tort claims or when the cases involve a federal law that incorporates state law. Also, the cases are in federal court. They're going via diversity jurisdiction. When that is the case, the court applies the substantive law of the state unless there's conflicting federal law. So we were talking before, why is it here? That's why under diversity jurisdiction, which I haven't dealt with since law school, but it's been a long time.
Question for Senator Gaines.
Sure.
Senator Gannon. Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Senator Gannon, for taking my question. Is there any other consumer product in New Hampshire that would enjoy the same kind of pending or future product liability absolution?
That would be beyond my scope of knowledge. I'm just dealing with this one situation here. Maybe, maybe not. I don't know.
So may I follow up? So in writing this and doing the research on this,
Yep.
it was not in reference to another consumer product absolution of liability
No,
for,
I was looking
mean,
at this product.
baby clothes,
I have a
flammable items.
manufacturer a manufacturer in my district who has a problem. People are bringing it here under diversity, whether because they think they can do it better in the home form of the business. I'm not exactly sure why they think New Hampshire is better, but they do. And they're coming here, and this company is making a safe product. Now people have 80 different reasons that you could make it different or better. Maybe it's better, maybe it isn't. If they're making a safe product that's doing the intended job, the addition of, like, I wouldn't want a gun with this finger safety mechanism that some people want. I'd like my wife to be able to use the gun if she wakes up at night and so there's an intruder in the house. I would not want a finger safety thing. I would also not want, I'd like her to have one round in the chamber if she doesn't put the clip in safely. So I can see they're just coming up with as many ways of suing this company as they can. They're fishing with deep pockets with unbelievable different claims. And again, I think the company's doing its job. We're a host state and we're benefiting from the company. If it was making a defective product, I'd have a whole different opinion. They're making what I consider a safe product. That's why I brought the amendment.
Last question.
If I could ask a question, this applies only to the manufacturer. However, what about the merchant who's selling it at a store? Wouldn't they still have this? I mean, I know because my understanding with the product liability claim, even though the merchant is not the manufacturer, they actually can still be, because they contributed to it, it's in the stream of commerce, could also be held liable for injury. So
Well, if we
wouldn't it-
just stuck with the fingerprint thing, you could sue any single sales company for selling
But
this
my
product.
question is, if we were to pass this, shouldn't we also include the merchant as well? Because in theory, the way this is written,
Sure.
only 6 Hour as the manufacturer would be exempt from this limited application of product liability claims. But I think the actual dealer,
Yep.
whether it's Bass Pro Shop, whatever, they could still be brought a claim against them. So shouldn't we expand it to, if you support the policy, shouldn't it be expansive to the dealer as well?
This is the trend that we're seeing right now coming from the manufacturer, but even if they go through the vendor, they're still coming to us, but maybe that is a protection that we need to look at as well, so.
Thank you. I'll go to Senator Reardon, since you're not been hogging all the questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think you're asking a legislative body to make a decision. I hope your product is not defective. I hope that is the end game, but there are lawsuits where incidents have happened, whether they're accidents or not, and there are juries who have listened to the facts that we're, of every instance, that we're not listening to here. And isn't that the province of a judge and a jury to look at the facts of each of them? And the fact that you don't want it happening in New Hampshire is one matter, but it doesn't stop judges and juries. And I would propose another strict liability product is fireworks. Would we ever consider to absolve the manufacturer of fireworks or the person that's training them or selling them or using them from the same kind of liability? It's a case-by-case instance that a judge and jury is going to listen to all the facts of and decide. I'm hard-pressed to say that.
This manufacturer, I do not believe, is looking to, if they have a product with the, if the gun's discharging on its own, they're not looking for an exemption if they have a defective product. They're looking to have, you have 80 different ideas of, you could have further safety items. That's what they're looking for, that you're not taking what is considered a gun and used in almost every state, and it's a safe gun. If it had a defect such as a discharge, they would lose in those cases. The judge would look at them.
I hope that is, I absolutely hope that is true, but I think the fact of the matter is there's judges and juries that have found otherwise. And I guess my conclusion to that is, isn't there some benefit to a defendant in any case to be in a forum that's heard these kind of cases before, assuming they're favorable outcomes for you, to stay in a forum where your arguments are known, there's a limited number of judges? Isn't that better than traveling across the whole United States to different forums and learning what the processes are
So do
there?
you
what
want to
the
go
likelihood
beyond a defective product now and say that they should have, be clairvoyant and know what in the future should come? They're
Yeah.
not looking for that absolution here. So if there's a defect, they want it heard, and they'd be fine to hear that case.
What I heard was that they would like New Hampshire to pass this law, so they're not hearing these cases in laws. But my point is, I don't think a legislature, if we do have the authority to make the decision that a judge and jury generally makes, that we are qualified to make that.
Well, I think in fairness, we do it with automobiles. It's, like you have a minimum standard safety feature. And I think what my understanding, and you may respond to this, is what this would do. So a loaded chamber indicator, a firearm that does not have a loaded chamber indicator on it, if that is what the claim is, the design defect, that we're saying that under the law, that will not amount to a defective design simply by not having a loaded chamber indicator on the firearm as a standard. But
My response would be to that is, if that's true, then you have a precedent in a court that says that you can rely on. Right?
you would, I think it would also depend on the type of firearm. There's a little more fact specific into that.
If I could, we're just looking for some help here. I mean, we're a private business that's being targeted. You have a couple of law firms that are scouring the country, finding these cases. We just want New Hampshire to say, hey, if it's defective, we get that. Like you said, we don't want to fight something that's defective, but you can't say it's defective, and this is their approach. You can't bring a court case to say it's defective because it doesn't have an optional feature, and you say it's unsafe. That's what we're trying to prevent. And so it's easier to bring it back here because we're headquartered here. We just want to push back and say, hey, we'll take up the cases if they're truly defective, but just because they don't have an external safety, loaded chamber, indicator, mechanism disconnect, you can't say it's defective. And that's what they're doing. So.
I hear you.
Senator McConkey?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, sir, for appearing, Representative. Sig Sauer, if correct me if I'm wrong, Sig Sauer could have located in any state, and they chose to come here. I remember this going back 20 plus years. I remember touring the factory. They They are a major manufacturer. We're fortunate to have you. Whatever product you make, we're fortunate to have you. I believe you have expanded at least twice. I know that you have a safety training facility in Exeter that not only trains police, but our own citizenry on the safe use of firearms and different. I do not, I may not be as steeped in the law as some of my members sitting to my right, but I believe wholeheartedly that it would appear that you are being singled out. And if you have a defective product, you will stand up for that product in any way it is. And I believe that this is appropriate and that we should stand with this company. Thank you.
If I made, this is my last follow-up, I'll cut myself off. So I have the proposed amendment, 1504S. But if you go to line 10, if it read a little differently and just said in any product liability action, and then what it would go on to say is related to or arising out of an incident, and then it goes back to the language involving a firearm, the manufacturer of the firearm, and you would add or a licensed firearm dealer should not be liable, and then it would read the same. So basically, you would include the licensed dealer. It wouldn't apply to pending suits, lawsuits, or claims. So it's arising out of a new incident, and then obviously, I think if you go to the end, that would apply on its effective date, it became law. So going forward, if this became law, I think that would that be something that would, do you have any comment on that?
I mean,
It sounds good to me, but go ahead.
yeah, I mean, any help would be good. I mean, of course, we want to address the pending cases that are going on right now, but legally you can't do that through the process then. But we would like to stop what's currently being filed here in New Hampshire. So,
Thank you. So my understanding is this doesn't just apply to the P320. This is any firearm?
yeah, because, well, and this is not just SIG, it's like firearm companies here in New Hampshire as well, but all these optional features you can get from different companies here in New Hampshire, just because it doesn't have that. So it's not just a SIG salary issue. We're the targeted one because we're doing a lot of production. We've won a lot of contracts, so we're more out there, more visible. But this would help the firearms industry overall in New Hampshire. But there are options, like the 365, which is a very popular gun, can have several of these options now. And so, it's, like I said, if they're truly defective, then we'll address that. But we don't want to say it's defective because you don't have a manual safety on it.
But recognizing if in the future, heaven forbid, there is a defective model out there, this is going to absolve you, assuming it doesn't have those safety features of any of those things. This is a
It wouldn't
blanket.
absolve them from a defect in the product.
Right.
It would absolve them from these things that we don't consider defects.
The way they're using it.
Any future product liability action involving a firearm shall not be liable in tort under the theory of a defective product design if it includes any of those four things that are listed under there. So in fact, someday there could be, I hope it never happens, a defective product out there, but this would protect you from a suit on that.
We could word it so that it was only, they're protected if it's not defective. If it shows there's no bullet in the chamber and there was,
Yeah.
that would be a defect that's not looking to be cured of, if it showed this hypothetical. So we could word it better. I understand what you want. Word it better so they're not getting a carte blanche when they really have a defect. That's not what they're looking for. Probably an error in my drafting.
Senator, respectfully, I think, but isn't that what lines 19 and 20 to 22 covers? Because I think that the claim, the defective claim that would, product liability claims that would be limited is what's highlighted on 14 to 17. I understood 19 to 22 to apply to say that if you can establish a defective design, and I think the example you used was the firearm would apparently fire on its own. That, I don't believe that would be prohibited to be brought. I think
It would not.
I think you can still bring that claim.
Okay. Yeah, they could, that claim, yes.
It's not, if I could address that again, it's not saying like a carte blanche. So like if for some reason a New Hampshire resident wants the manual safety, And for some reason, the manual safety, malfunctioned. It was a defect. And of course, that's different. And of course, that there was a defect. But we just don't want them to say, hey, just because they don't have one of these features, it's a defect if they inadvertently have a negligent discharge, And then if the gun goes off on its own, we've had those accusations before. There's many safeties inside the gun. They've never been able to recreate it from their experts. But for some reason, if it did that, then that would be a defect too. I mean, but we've never seen that and actually recreated at all.
Last question, then we'll move on.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for answering my question. This is for Senator Gannon. So why not just put Sig Sauer's name in the bill? You just, I mean, this is, they're
I put a
here,
lot of
this is
bills
for
forward for
them.
people and amendments. They're a business in my district. I know there's, in Senator Gray's district, they have a factory, has 2,000 people. In your district, in mine, I think there's another 3,000. So, and I see gun manufacturers as targets by certain individuals in the state. And I think certainly in our district, the 5,000-6,000 jobs are hugely significant. I would hate to see this employer say, geez, we're going to clear up shop because you guys are looking to get us. So I would like them to stay in New Hampshire. I would like them to see us as a welcoming community. As Senator McConkey said, they're employing great jobs for our community. They're supplying a product that's desired by our military, our citizens, and around the world. They're seen as being very good at what they do. The Mossad practices as amongst others, CIA, all these world companies, leaders send their training groups, their CIAs, they trust in this company. The product is very successful all over the world. I would hate to see them say, geez, this isn't a warm community to us. I would like them to stay in New Hampshire. I think they're a great asset to our state.
Are you threatening to leave?
No, they're not, but a hypothetical question, but no, but
You just,
well, I
you intimated that,
I
so-
want them, you asked why I did it. The reason I followed Bill.
We're not going to talk over each other as long as
Sure.
I'm holding this. All right, so let's
I'm sorry.
let's do our best.
Thank you, Senator.
Any further questions? Thank you both. Thank you, Senator.
Thank you.
For your testimony.
Thank you very much.
Are there any members of the public who are present who wish to testify that have not testified already in regards to Amendment 2025-1504? Seeing none, we will now close the public hearing on the amendment number 2025-1504S.
Thank you, sir.
I said the wrong number. So is it 2025-1504? That's not the right, so I've been looking at the wrong document the whole time.
Yeah, you were looking at the wrong one.
That's nice.
Sorry.
Can I have a copy of the correct one? Sorry.
Aaron, you still here? Come on back up. Are you introducing this bill? No, I'm sorry. Rep. Granger, probably not here. Do you want to introduce the bill for him?
Which hearing?
It's 551. Okay, Senator McConkey's going to do it. Repealing licenses to sell pistols and revolvers. Do you want to do it from here? Is
Sure.
that okay? Button.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, esteemed members of senators of this committee. I would like to introduce House Bill 551FN, repealing a license to sell pistols and revolvers.
Thank you very much. We will next call Aaron. You told me how to say your name. Atenic. Okay. Jay Simkin? Okay. Jay, you coming up to do the better job? Welcome, Mr. Simkin.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. I'm a federally licensed firearms dealer, have been so for a shade over 40 years, shade over 30 years here in New Hampshire. I want to state up front, I will benefit if this bill is enacted. It will save me, in a 3-year period, the $10 license fee that I pay to Nashua Police Department. It will save an hour of my time to get my signature notarized on the application, and it'll save another perhaps $10 on the cost of certified mail to proof delivery to Nashua Police Department. That said, the bill needs a further amendment, and if that be done, the bill will end state licensure of handgun sellers, which was enacted in 1923. I provide a copy of the text as enacted, as published in 1923, so you can see that with your own eyes. That's on addendum pages 1 to 2. State licensure is redundant because the federal authorities, at least for the past 15 years, as best I recall, have required any new applicant for a federal firearms license or any renewal applicant for a federal firearms license to send a copy of the application to the chief law enforcement officer or whoever is in charge of the Board of Selectmen of the town in which the business will be operated. So the purpose, when this was enacted in 1923, where there were no federal laws regarding firearms, was to make sure that a chief law enforcement officer would know who was selling handguns in his or her jurisdiction. With the enactment of Gun Control Act of 1968, the 1938 law setting up federal firearms licensure was incorporated, and as a result, a dealer under GCA 68, as that law is commonly known, has to keep very detailed records as to acquisition and disposition of all firearms, not just handguns, whether disposition is to a retail buyer or to another federal firearms licensee wherever located. So in short, GCA 68 made most of 159:8 redundant, and the federal requirement that a copy of an application for a federal firearms license be sent to the chief law enforcement officer or head of the Board of Selectmen made the rest of it redundant. There's one amendment that is needed to the bill as enacted by the House. On page 2 of my testimony, I will provide copies. There's a section that deals with handgun sales to non-residents and suggests that New Hampshire can issue a permit for a firearm dealer in New Hampshire to sell a handgun to a non-resident. That's simply in violation of federal law. Let me clarify. If someone from, say, Ohio wants to buy a firearm from me, they can pay me for the firearm. I may not lawfully deliver that firearm to them. I have to ship it to a federal firearms licensee in the state of Ohio, who will transfer it to that buyer if, in the judgment of that Ohio-based federal firearms licensee, the transfer is lawful under federal law and under the laws of the state of Ohio and any local ordinances that may be applicable. So the language talking about the issuance of a permit in New Hampshire to a non-resident to acquire a handgun in New Hampshire, simply it conflicts with GCA 68. It has conflicted since that enactment, which is well over about this point 57 years ago. Why that wasn't cleaned up, I can't explain, but it should be cleaned up. So in short, federal law and regulation make 159:8 redundant, and it can therefore go away. And the language that deals with sale of handguns to non-residents, again, conflicts with federal law and should also go away. At this point, I will be happy to take any questions relevant to my testimony or any other questions having to do with lawful disposition of firearms under federal law.
We'll just keep it to this, Bill. Do we have any questions? Okay. We're great. Thank you very much for your
I
testimony.
would like to add,
Sure.
if I may,
Yes.
there was some testimony as to a New Hampshire-made firearm so marked. What would a person who owned it do if they wanted to go to another state?
We'll just go there with that other bill. You're talking about the earlier bill.
Yes.
Yeah, we're just gonna stick with this one right now.
Okay, because there is a way to deal with the problem,
Okay.
and it's simple. It isn't cheap, $200 tax, but simple.
Thank you for your testimony. Appreciate it.
You are welcome. Thank you for hearing my testimony.
Our
And
pleasure. Does anyone wish to testify on 551? The room's pretty empty. I don't think I'm going to miss anyone today. Thank you all. The hearing's adjourned. And we're good. We're not going to exec anything today. Tuesday or Thursday? Oh, yeah, nothing today. Thank you. Thank you both.